Positive psychology is a relatively new discipline. It's the scientific study of happiness. Traditionally, psychology, psychiatry, and other mental health disciplines have studied psychological distress. They've looked at anxiety, they've looked at depression, they've looked at other forms of mental illness, and have sought ways to resolve these. Positive psychology asks another question: do we know anything about what actually makes people happy? Traditionally, mental health disciplines have tried to move people from -5 to 0. As Freud said, the goal of psychoanalysis was to turn hysterical misery into ordinary human unhappiness. This discipline asks the question whether anything more is possible, and if so, how might we attain it? It's interesting when we look at positive psychology that so many of us find happiness to be elusive. In fact, it says in the Declaration of Independence that we should be free to pursue happiness, but it doesn't tell us how to do that. Indeed, happiness for many of us seems elusive, as though it's some kind of a fugitive. We run after it and seem to have a great deal of difficulty finding it. This is probably because we may not have evolved to be happy. If we think of evolutionary forces, what they do is they select for organisms over time that are able to successfully reproduce and whose children are able to grow up and reproduce themselves. These forces don't care really whether the organism is having fun along the way or is enjoying their life. There may not be any ingrained propensity toward happiness. And in fact, many of the mechanisms that help us to survive, our ability to think about the future, remember bad things that have happened, anticipate things that may go wrong, all of those skills actually often contribute to our unhappiness. It turns out that we human beings are actually terrible at predicting what will make us happy. Many of us have myths that achieving a certain something, whether it's a career accomplishment or money or something with our family, is going to give us enduring happiness. But it turns out that these things rarely work. For example, many people think that becoming rich would do it. It turns out that people with a lot of money aren't appreciably happier than middle-class folks. Many of us assume that, oh, if only I could be young again, then I'd be happy. Well, this is very interesting. It turns out that older people, when you sample their experience day by day, have many more moments of happiness than young people do. It's also very common to believe that if I could have a family and have children, that would make me happy. And while people certainly love their children, when you go in and investigate and actually ask people during the day what their mood is like at different moments, most people are not happier when they're taking care of their kids than when they're doing other things. In fact, having children isn't by itself a path to happiness. It's such an interesting question because it is hard to be happy, or it is at least hard to sustain it for many of us. It actually turns out that our propensity for happiness is somewhat hardwired, that each of us has a genetic, what they call a set point, which is a kind of level of happiness that we tend to go back to whether good or bad things happen in our lives. As we say in the Positive Psychology report and explain, there's something called the hedonic treadmill, which means that even when good things happen in our life, things that we think, that's going to really make me happy, after a while we become accustomed to it. We do what's called habituating to the new reality. And after getting used to it, it no longer sustains our happiness. So for example, lottery winners, if you interview them a year after winning the lottery, they're no happier than lottery losers. It doesn't seem to stick. It doesn't seem to last. So much of what the study of positive psychology has been about is seeing, are there paths to happiness that are more enduring, that aren't dependent on fickle fortunes going up and down, and that we don't just habituate to, but can sustain us over time? Researchers have identified 5 broad paths to happiness. The first one involves using our strengths. And the particular strengths that are useful to use are what are called virtues often. They're things such as our sense of wisdom, our sense of justice, our curiosity, our compassion for others, and those sorts of qualities that really the world's philosophers and religions have always recognized as important. When we engage those in our daily life, we become happier. The second area involves gratitude. It's basically appreciating what we have and expressing that appreciation both to ourselves as well as to other people who have been generous to us, loving to us, kind to us in our lives. A third involves savoring. That means really tasting the moment, slowing down, taking the time to smell the roses, noticing what's happening in each moment in our lives, not always rushing forward, trying to get to the next item. Related to that is the idea of engagement, or what's often called flow. This means being in our activities, not self-consciously, not trying to achieve some kind of external goal, but for the process of it, for the experience of it. Athletes often talk about this as being in the zone. The final big area involves living life in a way which is meaningful, and that almost always means doing things for others rather than for our own aggrandizement. So it means, whether that means helping something for the environment or helping other people in a more close personal way, serving others seems to be very important for sustaining happiness. Mindfulness practice is very interesting because it helps to enhance happiness really by allowing those other factors that we've talked about to come to fruition. It's a technology, in a sense, that we can learn to change our relationship to moment experience that makes it easier to express our virtues, to have gratitude, to savor the moment, to lead a meaningful life, and to be engaged. Simply put, mindfulness is about attending to our experience and accepting whatever arises. So it's awareness of present experience with acceptance. And most people think, well, I'm aware of my present experience with acceptance. What's special about that? But when you begin to watch the mind carefully, doing mindfulness practices, which are usually meditation techniques, we start to see that much of the time the mind is either thinking about the past, living in fantasies about what has happened, or thinking about the future, imagining what's coming next. It's relatively unusual to just be present, to just be in the here and now. But it's a skill that can be learned. And once we begin to learn that, it opens up many, many possibilities for human happiness. Well, there are many ways to cultivate mindfulness. It's probably easiest to understand if we think about an analogy to physical fitness. If you want to become physically fit, you could do it in several ways. One would simply be to alter your routine a little bit just so that you use your body more. So you might take the elevator instead of the stairs. You might bicycle to work instead of drive to work, or just park the car further away in the lot. Similarly, for mindfulness practice, you can go through your normal routine, but begin to do all of it as more of a mindfulness practice. So that means when getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth, actually pay attention to what it feels like to brush your teeth. When taking a shower, actually pay attention to all those droplets of water caressing your body in the morning and feel what that's like. And carry that on through the day, whether it's driving to work, walking the dog, whatever you might be doing. Now, if you want to become really physically fit, you'd also want to take some time out and go to the gym. That means taking time out from your normal routine specifically to cultivate physical fitness. In the same way, you can take time out from your normal routine to specifically cultivate mindfulness. And you do what are called formal mindfulness practices or meditation practices. And in meditation, one picks a particular object of awareness. It might be the sensation of the breath rising and falling in the belly. It might be the sensation of walking slowly on the ground. And one brings one's attention to that particular sensation, and every time the mind wanders into thoughts of the future or thoughts of the past, you gently bring the attention back to the present moment. Doing that over time tends to cultivate mindfulness that extends out throughout the rest of our lives.